Oh, goodness. Weird how it's not really lined up on the side. Yeah, I don't think you can do anything. Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here today. We're on page 51 in your journals, talking about the green life is our conversation for today. Couple of announcements first. Extra credit movie tonight. Tonight, 7 o'clock in HHD 355. Conversation about Kiss the Ground, which ties directly into today's class. The story of how agriculture, the history of agriculture, and how that is practiced here these days, and then what can change so that we are actually working more in tandem with Earth's cycles. I found it to be a really enticing movie in that there are so many different connections to be made. So this will tie into conversations that we'll have later in class as well, about carbon emissions, fossil fuels, as well as choices that we have to make around our food systems and how we move through the world. And so it's a great educational piece. It's also very informational, and I found it to be just entertaining as well. That all of these, the way that they put it all together, feels really good. So Kiss the Ground tonight, 7 o'clock, HHD 335. So a moment just to center ourselves. And I've been thinking a lot about the ways that we grow. So as we take our breaths and come to presence here in this moment, thinking about growth. So it could relate to plants, to the things that we're growing and eating. It could be how we grow and expand our thoughts and our minds. So just taking a moment to appreciate the ways that we have that we can grow, that we can change, that we can learn and unlearn, all of these different ways that we are moving through the world. So take a good deep breath. Think about your growing. And here we are. So to begin, I want to point out that we have these opportunities in each week. There are links that might entice you to go and look at sort of expanding what we're doing in class. 50 minutes isn't very long for that growth, right? So if you find links, these links to be interesting, or if they take you down other pathways of finding connections, if you find really interesting things that connect to the class, that might go up in a chart, in an opportunity for future BiSci students like this, then will you please send them to me so that I can include them for future students? That's how these got started, is students finding things that were enticing and might help other students along. So that's here for you to explore. So I'd like you to brainstorm there on your journal right now 3 ways that you are different from plants. 3 ways that you are different from plants. When you have your list of 3, you can take a little chat with your neighbor. All right, so what sorts of things did you put down? Ways that you are different than plants? Either something you said or something your neighbor said. Yes. You have morals, knowing right and wrong. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. We can verbally speak. Good. Communication in the verbal kind of way. Yes. Others?
I said we breathe oxygen when plants breathe carbon dioxide.
Yep. So something we've talked about, the idea that we are connected in that way, right? The cycle, but breathing in using different ways. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay, so there were some differences. And now we're going to do the opposite. What are some ways that you are the same as plants? Can you list 5? Ooh. Okay, so what do you have for this category? Similarities. Thank you.
Tree or plants and us, we both have roots.
Have
Plants are
roots.
physical roots. We have roots to the people we love.
Yeah, roots to people that we love. So we have roots. Sweet. Well said. Other similarities?
So I think it's either cucumbers or watermelons. They have hairs on their like stems. So I guess we as humans, since we have like hair all over our body, and they have like on their stem. So
Interesting. Good point. And I think it's both, actually, cucumbers and watermelons in that family of plants. Nice.
Similar to plants, like we're affected by the seasons and like flowers, like we can't bloom all year round. A flower can't bloom all year round. There's
Mhm.
good time for like rest in the winter and just how the
Mhm.
seasons affect us.
Yeah, beautiful. How the seasons affect us. Sam, there's someone up here in the front.
I said that like they both go through like different life cycles and can also like be loved by all.
Interesting. Different life cycles and can be loved by all.
Mhm.
Sweet. Love that. So lots of similarities. So we're going to be focusing today and just seeing what else comes up. We'll start, where we have already been, just this idea of breathing, the idea that we both need to breathe. Breathing in, I receive from earth, and breathing out, I give to earth, right? There's this, it's the dualism of giving and receiving. And sometimes, in going back to that dualism class, it seems as though giving is the superior and receiving is inferior, except that they need each other. There's this balance, this really beautiful reciprocity of giving and receiving. And so this is the scientific equation that we look at when we're talking about photosynthesis, how plants take in the carbon dioxide and the water through their chlorophyll and the sun's energy. They create the sugars. That's the food that the plants need. And then it's also the food that they might share. And then they give off the oxygen. So the carbon dioxide is from us, from you, and then the O2 is to you. So this is, we've been here. Oxygen, one mature tree provides enough oxygen for about 2 people, and therefore vice versa, right? So plants also eat. They're understanding that plants eat the sun, right? They're creating this C6H12O6, the sugars that they need for the growth of their bodies. This is an interesting book, How Plants Power the Planet. In some way, we are all needing that power of the sun, right? We can't use it directly, but the plants are using it, and we need to have the plants. So the idea that the wavelength range on the electromagnetic spectrum, the same wavelength that we see, is the same wavelength that the plants need to create their sugars. So this very small spectrum on these wavelengths is where we see our colors, and that's also where they are using that sun's energy to get there or to make the nutrients that they need. So as we look around, we see things, most of us see things in a lot of different colors, some of us a little bit less. But what's happening in our eyes to make that happen is that our eyes are sorting out the wavelengths, and each of those primary colors is part of those wavelengths. So there's one, at this end is at this end is violet, and then at this end is red, and then this, they say that this green you can see that green and red are the longest sections of what we see most. So that means that we can see and distinguish more shades of green than most other colors, right? Other than red. So what is it why would we need to see and identify more shades of green? If you think about the evolution of human history, why seeing more shades of green? Why is that intriguing or important for us. Anybody have an idea about that? Yeah.
Our think of like hunter and gatherer state from evolution.
Yeah, our hunter and gatherer evolution from that time when we were seeing different shades of green, identifying different foods and maybe their ripeness based on those shades of green. So our eyes evolved better to perceive, or more to perceive those shades of green. There are animals that see in other wavelengths beyond what we can see. There are people or animals, that can see into the ultraviolet radiation rays, and then also those in the infrared rays. So this extra broad sense of vision. So there are things like blood-sucking insects that can see different wavelengths, snakes, frogs, fish. Some birds of prey can see in other wavelengths because it helps them to move through the world and do the things that they need to do, survive. For instance, American kestrels, these little tiny falcons, Eurasian kestrels, they can see in these spectrums in the ultraviolet because when they're sitting up on that tree branch, watching down, watching the paths of mice, they might not see the mouse, but mouse urine shows up in ultraviolet colors. So we can't see it as anything different, but it shows up in super purple colors to these birds that are using them as prey. So that is advantageous to them. You're going to read about this word in your book this week, Umwelt. Umwelt is, it's a German word that means understanding or looking at the world from the perspective of other beings. So if I imagine myself as a kestrel and what it's like to look down and see, it creates another level of understanding. It creates some empathy for these animals when we can think about what their perspective on life is, their life experiences that are very different than ours. We can come to this higher level of appreciation for the variety of beings on our planet if we can sort of capture this sense of Umwelt in our own lives. So plants. We have a circulatory system. We talked about blood. We talked about that movement. Pardon me a moment. Sorry. And plants also have the circulatory system. They need to move the nutrients that they're creating. They need to move water through their whole being. And so their circulatory system looks like this. There are two parts. There's the xylem and the phloem. Xylem transports water and some nutrients from roots, so all the way from the bottom, up to the leaves and the shoots. So the xylem goes up, and then the phloem transports the sugars made in the leaves, up there, to all over the rest of the tree. So very similar functioning to the arteries and veins that we have in our bodies. So that's another way that we're similar, that we both have circulatory systems. Plants have evolved. The first plants to come to land did so about 430 million years ago, long before vertebrates did. So thinking about this as the evolutionary tree, right, starting down here at the protists, and then moving up, we can see this branch where the seaweed came, and then where the mammals came off of this branch, and here we are up here, relatively new on the planet, compared to these, the protists that eventually became plants. So the first big trees evolved about 360 million years ago, and they had roots and leaves. And those lycopod kinds of trees could only live in moist environments because they were all transported or grown by spores. And those spores need lots of moisture in the soil so that they can root and grow. But then the innovation came, the seeds, and we'll be talking about seeds more in just a moment. And those seeded plants gave way then to these vast forests. So during those times, like the Mesozoic area, 66 million years ago, hardwood trees were more common, oaks and hollies and walnuts, birches. So those are relatively, quote unquote, new, just 66 million years ago. So plants carry this long story, just like we do, right? In our evolutionary history, we share, as a matter of fact, about 60% of our DNA with bananas. So interestingly enough, showing the long history down here of that evolution together. 60% of our DNA with bananas, 50% of our DNA with most trees, 40% of our DNA with apples, 25% of our DNA is the same as daffodils. So in comparison to other animals or other kinds of moving beings, we share 44% of our DNA with bees, and then 90% with cats, 84% with dogs, and we share about 98% of our DNA with pigs. So it's interesting to me just how much of there is this overlap, right? These connections between beings. So somebody talked about, we said that there's verbal communication in humans, but in plants, there are different kinds of communication, which helps in this kind of way where plants are growing. This is a really interesting organism. All of the yellow that you see in this image is one organism. This is one being. So this is a clonal grove, which means it's one being underneath the ground, and it keeps popping up sprouts, right, in the form of these aspen trees. This is in Utah's Fish Lake National Forest, and it evolved just after the extinction of the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. The word for this, the name of this being is called pando. It means eye spread. 47,000 different stems on this one plant. It covers more than 100 acres. It's the heaviest known organism on the planet. And so this idea of how we think about trees can actually change a little bit about how they grow, how they move, and then also how they communicate. So understanding that there is this level of communication, so they communicate through the air and under the ground. So did you load a video? Yeah, great. Thank you. And so we're going to watch this quick video.
Da kümmern sich tatsächlich die Eltern, die Mutterbäume und ihre Nachwuchs. Hier haben wir einen anderen Kindergarten.
I started looking at the root systems, and I found that the roots of these different species, when they grew together, they were all intertwined and interlinked together.
When we Charles people on Vancouver Island, they would say fish ish law, which means everything is one.
Was wir als Baum betrachten, das ist nur oberirdisch. Ein Großteil des Lebens findet aber unterirdisch statt. Also auf einen Teelöffel gehen mehrere Kilometer Pilzfäden, die dicht verwoben das Internet des Waldes bilden.
The mycorrhizal network is just below the surface of the forest floors. All of the trees were all linked together in a single massive network. That was sort of a rudimentary understanding of the language of trees.
Bäume haben Gefühle, die können Schmerz empfinden, aber die haben auch solche Emotionen, kann man fast sagen, wie Angst. Es gibt bei Bäumen auch besondere Freundschaft, dass Bäume sich gerade so als Ehepaar zusammentun und dann ganz besonders rücksicht aufeinander nehmen.
We think of that as an interaction between trees, but it's really, they're looking after each other.
Also ihr kämpft nicht jeder gegen jeden, es ist nicht ganz im Gegenteil, ihr unterstützt jeder jeden. Also ein Baum, der von Insekten befallen wird, der warnt alle anderen vor in seinem Umfeld.
Through these various experiments and our discoveries, I've started to think about the root systems of trees and forests as the brains of the forest.
Hier ist ein uralter Stumpf. Dieser Stumpf, der lebt noch.
Stump is still alive because its root systems are actually grafted to its neighbors.
Von Natur aus kuscheln Bäume gerne, stehen möglichst eng zusammen und lieben die Gemeinschaft und die lieben auch die Langsamkeit.
You know, trees don't do well when they're by themselves. You know, we as humans are part of that forest, and what we're perceiving is really valuable, and we should be paying attention to that.
It demonstrates those relationships that we've known and understood for a long time.
Really, they are caring for each other. They're making sure that they're a productive, healthy, vibrant, diverse community of trees, families of trees.
So this connection, this communication that they have, communication through chemicals that they send to each other in the air. So if that insect attacks, like they showed in the video, those insects attack one tree, it sends out these chemical warning signals, which then alert the other trees to create this chemical inside of them that then helps to, actually part of it calls in the birds. So if it's like a caterpillar, then it sends out these pheromones that birds can sense, and then they come in and eat the caterpillars, right? There are these intense communications in forests that we are only beginning to understand. This is relatively new research, and there's more coming, right? There's more understanding and connection. In there, he expresses that there's, trees have feelings, and that can show up as a lot of different things, right? So when they're feeling, quote unquote, attacked by something that's trying to eat them, then they result in that communication, right? So feelings might not be exactly like what we experience as feelings, except we don't really know that yet. Michael Pollan, he's a writer and thinks a lot about the natural world and human relationships within the natural world. He says, I don't think plants are sentient. They are not conscious in the way that we are, but they do have agency. On their own time scale, they are reacting and they have intelligence. They deal with changes in their environment. They either adapt to the change or they change what's going on for them. So if this intrigues you, you can look up these names. These are the people, Suzanne Simard and Peter Wolleben are the ones in the video, and Michael Pollan is the one that I just mentioned. And so there's lots of interesting research going on right now about that. So the wisdom then of these connections, plants depend on community, another similarity like what we depend on community. These plants are trees are sending their nutrients as well to smaller plants. So sometimes these large plants are called the mother tree or the wisdom tree. These larger trees nurture younger trees around them, and one mother tree can be connected literally to hundreds of other trees around her. And through these conversations in the mycorrhizal network under the ground, they are developing a resilience in that forest. They are supporting each other and building each other up for this community. So the experimentation reveals that this mycorrhizal network, the fungi underneath the ground, are moving carbon and water and nutrients depending on who needs what at what time of year. So 1/3 of the food that a big tree makes, because she's going to be taller, she's going to be bigger, she might cover up the leaves of some of the other plants around her. And so she has the access to the sunlight to create more nutrition. That then she shares with the other trees around her. So according to a 2011 study in Philadelphia, researchers reported a lifespan of 13 years for downtown street trees. So downtown Philadelphia street trees along the streets are going to be 13 years old, compared with 37 years for trees that live in people's yards And then compared with 60 years for trees that live in parks with other trees, and then 150 years in that same region for trees that are living in tracts of forest land. So the difference between 13 years for solo trees versus 150 years where trees are living in community where they can give and receive nutrients and other support is pretty dramatic, the difference. She made the comment, we know that trees alone don't live as long, they don't survive as well. So take a moment and talk to your neighbor about what's coming up for you in this moment. Are these things that you knew before? Are these things that are new to you? How are you feeling about it? Just take a moment for conversation. Is there one more video? Thank you. Are there any thoughts or questions? I don't have all the answers. Science doesn't have all the answers, but maybe if you have a question, then maybe somebody else in here knows more and can share about that too. So thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Do you know one of the reasons why plants and trees near urban areas and suburban areas have a reduced lifespan?
I think it's partly the air quality could contribute to that as well as just being alone, right? And so there's probably a balance of needs that aren't being met for those trees that are growing just on the street.
Got it. Yeah. So you're saying like pollutants, as in like carbon dioxide, in abundance of it. Also, like what other stuff in the air? Like, would you know about that?
Right. Well, carbon and methane, as well as, yes, sulfur, nitrogen, all of those different things that come out of the backs of our cars when we drive them around, have these pollutants in there that are harder for trees as well as for us to process in our bodies and their bodies. Yeah. So I don't know all of the science around it, or I don't know to what degree that changes. And what levels are okay and what levels are too much. But I do know that those pollutants trees are struggling in those situations more so. Yeah. Thank
Got
you.
it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Do you think the studies would show different results if it was in a more walkable community with less like pollution?
Could be, right? Yes. And I think that that's why maybe they chose Philadelphia because Philly has all these different regions, right? So the difference between the 13-year-old trees and the 37-year-old trees and the 60-year-old trees and the 150-year-old trees, right? Different kinds of communities with different dynamics, all though within that corner of Pennsylvania, within that city region. I think that it could be, yes, very different, depending if the study was done like where I grew up, kind of in the middle of nowhere, it would be a different probably dynamic. But in that case, they could study all four of those regions or different growing conditions and find out the differences. So yeah, interesting. So thank you. Yeah.
Did they take into account like the different kinds of like trees and plants and stuff like that from the different geographic locations?
Right, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that one. Yes, so we can go back and look at the study. I can send out a link to that study and yeah, and we can dive into it a little more deeply. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
I just am curious about like the power that plants have, the trees specifically, to affect us with those chemicals that they give off. Like
Mhm.
if we are walking through a forest, do we benefit at all by what they produce?
Right. That's a really interesting question. Are we benefiting by what else plants are giving off? There's a whole research around that, particularly related to hemlock trees and different. Autumn, would you be willing to speak for just a moment about that? So will you? Thank you. Pass the. So there's a whole art of forest bathing and spending time in forests, and Autumn has some experience with that.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different chemicals that trees give off. And within these compounds, there are benefits for us. And so that's why, when you think of essential oils, that's what a lot of essential oils are made out of, these different chemicals that plants have, that then when they are put into a diffuser in your home, or even if you take a walk in the natural world, you're getting natural parts of these plants, and it's going into your system and it's helping you. But you can also get a diffuser yourself and make these oils yourself, or you can get them at the store and get these benefits. And every single plant has different compounds that benefit you in different ways.
Yeah, thank you. Some of that happens in the spring. So as you look at these images, right, we have the red bud tree above the lion. We have the eastern hemlock tree and its cone. We have some apple blossoms here. These are the flowers, aren't they beautiful? The delicate flowers of the maple leaves, the maple trees, and then dogwood flowers. So why? Why do these cones or flowers exist? It's because plants are having sex, right? This is what's going on. As you walk around in the spring and that green stuff is all over your car, that is pollen. That is plant sex. Those are the male parts of the plants that are traveling to these female parts in here. And that's what's happening in the spring. So that spring excited feeling that we all kind of like so relieved about winter passing. Right now, the trees are all sleeping. They're gaining this energy, right? They're saving up this energy because the first thing that's going to happen is that they're going to wake up. It's called vernalization, the vernal equinox. That's spring. That's May 20th. Vernal equinox, vernalization is when plants wake up and they spend all of this time that they've been resting, right? So that they can wake up and make more plants. And so I want to show you this very old, kind of goofy video, except I can't find a better one. This is what's happening inside of plants when there's this fertilization is happening. So check this out.
Flower is pollinated and the pollen lands here, but it still isn't fertilization. The nucleus in the pollen still has to reach the nucleus in the egg down here. Now the pollen grows a long tube like a long straw, which funnels the nucleus to the egg.
Seen under a microscope, these pollen grains are germinating. Pollen tubes are growing from the pollen grains. The male nucleus from the pollen passes down the tube on its way to the female egg cell, where they will fuse and fertilization will be complete.
So the parts of the flower, right? When we're looking at the flowers as spring is coming, I love spring. Spring is coming, and taking a closer look at flowers, understanding that the petals are there and they are beautiful and they show up in those colors that we can see, but they're also showing up in colors that we can't see, but that insects can see. The insects fly in here. They are picking up some of this pollen that is on these stamen, right? And then they are going to fly to the next flower and take that pollen from one flower to the next. And that's how that passing of the genetic material goes. And then what you just saw in the video then happens, going down through the stigma here to where the egg cells are and the ovaries are here. And so when you see something that is absolutely beautiful, these flowers, that's what's going on. That's why plants have flowers. That's why they have cones. And so this is what's happening. Spring fever is happening. And so then we can talk about the idea that plants have babies. Aren't they so cute? Like, these are plant babies. They go out into the world just like people do and spread out their genetic. That's why you're all here and not at home, is because your parents are spreading you out into the world. They are dispersing you into the world just like plants disperse their young. So how this can happen is lots of different ways. They disperse their babies away from home, and that could happen. The maples, you know those? They do the whirligig thing. They blow in the wind. They need to move away from their mamas so that they can take their genetic material over here and grow a new maple tree. Apples, when we eat apples and we dispose of the cores in the compost pile, those apples, actually, back up a minute, apples are really ripe and have this juicy outside because that's all of the stuff that's going to help that plant have nutrients when it grows. So we're sort of interrupting the cycle when we eat the fleshy good part. But there are enough that survive that pass on their genetic material. So you imagine a deer out there in the woods eating off of a tree, an old apple tree in the field somewhere, and then they walk along and they poop out the seeds. And so those nutrients are getting spread. Apple seeds are spreading that way. It could be by blue jays or other birds. Blue jays are the #1 dispersal mechanism for oak trees. So you can see this blue jay carrying its gullet is full of acorns. And then there are alder seeds. Alder seeds can last a year in water. Alder trees grow next to streams. Their seeds drop into the water, and then those seeds can travel a year downstream before they get washed up on the bank someplace and grow up a new alder. So seeds must be dispersed to allow for genetic strength and variation for those species. And trees die, right? Just like we talked about on Monday, we die, trees die. This is a big, what they call a nurse log. This is an old tree that died and is now giving its nutrients to these trees that are growing up on it. Nurse log. And so as they decay, they are releasing their nutrients just like we do. So in summary, we breathe, we're made up of the same elements, we eat, have a circulatory system, we've evolved, we all grow, we share the same light wavelengths, we share resources, we communicate, we have sex and we have babies, we disperse our young into the world, and they die, we die, and return to the earth. So there are all of these connections. And there's more, believe it or not. So when we look at our hands and the hands of our ancestors, the grasping hands of primates are an adaptation to life in the trees. Our hands are shaped like this so we can climb trees. the opposable thumb helping to grasp branches, the flat fingernails and the large fingertip pads that help us to hold on. Those are all adaptations to life in the trees. So humans and plants have this very complex relationship that goes back far, far into our joint evolutionary history. This legacy can be seen today as plants provide our nutrition and fiber and food, pharmaceuticals and energy for us and for lots of other animals and beings around the globe. Plant domestication and agriculture allowed human society to develop the way that we are now, and our settlements became much more complex over time, all due to plants. So as such, our modern cities and cultures rely in that stable and reliable production and distribution of food. So we can see, right, that plants are central to our well-being. There are so many things, not just food and not just oxygen, but also as key components of our cultures and religions and medicines. And so when we look at art that is done related to plants, the artfulness of the plants as those spring flowers come up, that is art in and of itself. So we can appreciate plants on more than just this level that we share, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and we eat them. There are a lot more layers. They're really central to our societies these days, and many days prior to us, and many days ahead of us. So recent studies have shown what we may already suspect. Neighborhoods that have more trees have lower human mortality rates. The association gets stronger as trees get bigger. The older trees are better for our health. The scientific findings that large trees have a greater health impact than smaller ones is telling. They're better at absorbing that air pollution that we talked about. They're better at moderating temperatures and reducing noise. Those are actually 3 factors that are linked to higher death rates: air pollution, higher temperatures, and noise. According to Robin Wall Kimmerer, she is a botanist and a member of the Native Society. She says, in some native languages, the term for plants translates to those who take care of us. So thinking about community, right? Thinking about coming together in community, how tightly we've been woven. The Chipko movement was in the 1970s, a nonviolent movement aimed at protection and conservation of trees and forests. It originated from the word embrace, as the villagers used to hug the trees to protect them from the woodcutters. So this peaceful resistance to achieve goals, the idea that these people knew how important the trees were for their cultures. What we are doing to the forests of the world is but a mere reflection of what we are doing to ourselves and to one another. Mahatma Gandhi. As deforestation has ramped up on planet Earth, the climate has changed significantly. Warmer, more adverse climate conditions are creating more difficult growing conditions for forest ecosystems, but also for cultures to grow. We must take care of our trees just like we take care of our own bodies. If we don't, they won't be around to help us in the many ways that we do. I believe that we've lost these connections that really make us who we are as people. And so considering that, what comes up for you when you think about hugging trees? I know that this class is sometimes called the tree hugger class. So let's just lean into it. What comes up for you when you think about hugging trees? What comes up for you when you see these images? Take a moment. Consider this, and then I would love to welcome any comments or thoughts. I will be happy to welcome comments and thoughts at the beginning of our next class. I'll leave you with this quote. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still and know the forest knows you. Let it find you. Thanks very much. I hope you have a beautiful day. Love it.